not to be involved in politics, to just, whenever it becomes politics, it's a thing of the other side. So it's important that you talk about the importance of this political education. But on the when we gave a mandate to His Excellency Sisikwa Yoktabe to put together the interim government, we gave him a clear mandate: take us to Boya as fast as possible. And I'm a bit privy to the work of some of the secretaries, and everybody, they are sharp, focused on let us get to Boya as fast as possible. And clearly we are missing something. We are missing that political education, which is very important for grooming us to where we are going, for grooming us to Boya. This is going to take us another 6, 7, 9 months, a year. It's going to take us time. And it's very important that we also have that political education. And we didn't give that mandate to our government. Our government needs to stay focused on that. So how do we, as Southern Cameroonians, how do we now come together and push this political education agenda, use the SCBC platform to educate our people so that we are strong mentally for the place that we are going? Because I think it will take away some of the useless arguments that we have on social media if we were engaged in this political debate, political education, educating ourselves about other struggles, about other movements around the world, and looking at our context in all that. So how do we do that? How do we do that? Because the last conclave, we disbanded SCACUF, and SCACUF was really playing that role. So now, how do we as a people, how do we do that?
Well, you've just mentioned SCACUF being disbanded, and I know that there is a groundswell of concerns that is beginning to be raised by our people as to why this decision was taken to disband SCACUF. I think at that particular point in time, it seemed to make sense. But more and more, as people ask questions, it becomes relevant that we revisit the question and see if there is the need to have a political platform that will act as a buffer to the interim government, but at the same time, whose main mandate is to ensure that it strengthens the interim government, but plays a political role. Political role, like you were saying, which includes, for instance, political education, ensuring that our masses, be they at home or in the diaspora, get educated. In fact, when you talk about political education, I remember the story of an old man that I met on Robben Island, and how the ANC was able to educate its people, even those who were in prison. At every single point in time, they were educating each other. They were always making sure, and that's why many of them went to jail as illiterates, and when they came out, they had degrees, because you never spent any bit of your time doing nothing. It is important, therefore, that we maximize our time, ensuring that whatever little time, opportunity we have, we educate our people. That is very important. You talked about the importance of having a political platform and education that we need to give our people. That is something that we have been talking about. And when you talked about the mandate, I think this mandate should come naturally. But given the role that the interim government has got to play, it has to go out there and engage stakeholders from international stakeholders. It needs to be in the business of governing our people, coming up with policy issues. It becomes important that somebody else plays that role, ensures that it builds the confidence of our people and prepares them for the future. This is important also because it helps to start thinking about the kind of Southern Cameroons that we want to run. One of the difficulties we face generally as we go out there and try to pitch our country and this country that we envisage is the fact that, in as much as we have a blueprint, which we do know about, is the fact that not everybody can market that. And it becomes important that at every level, every single person knows the kind of country we envisage, and they're able to sell it and market it.
Yeah. So, well, when you're talking about this political education, I also see, like when we started, when SCACUF came into play around April, it was also a tool for mobilization. It brought people over, people who were not into the struggle. They brought into an institutionalized way of doing things. They brought into structures. and it was easy to draft people with skill into various departments to do specific tasks to foster the work of the movement. That is something that brought. And in as much as our government has got specialized departments, I really, really think that we still need to, with the growth of country leadership, countries have come together, like South Africa came together and voted a coordinator. It's the same thing in Germany, it's the same thing in France, same in Spain. We are counting about 27 different regions where our people have come together and voted leadership. And I think that they should play the role of mobilization. They should mobilize beyond the current base. You know, instead of just focusing on governance and just governing the people who are already in the revolution, we should go back to that grassroots mobilization and education, conscientization in such a way that we bring in more people who are out of the current base now, so that they can bring in their own skill, bring in their expertise, so that we can expand. I really think that is something that we should be looking into.
Yeah, I mean, you're very right. But then an area which we need to strengthen, and in fact we need to work very hard to do, is discipline. When you talk about grassroots support, when you talk about mobilization of the masses, it also goes with the discipline that comes with it. One of the major weaknesses that we have encountered so far with this revolution has been the almost total absence of discipline. And it is that lack of discipline that, for instance, would prompt an individual or individuals to bring a camera to the conclave and do a live stream of it. Anybody who understands how the conclaves were designed and were run from the very beginning, the conclave was not open to every single individual. The conclave is the meeting of leaderships. Like I've said somewhere else, the conclave is a meeting of cardinals, not a conclave, not a meeting of every priest and catechist. The moment you open it up to everybody, what you're doing is that you're putting our whole leadership in jeopardy. That is one of the few instances where you're bringing all our leaders together to sit in one room and deliberate over a certain period of time. There is the dangers. There are security dangers that come with that. There are all kinds of problems that come with that. The last thing you want is for an individual to come and do a live stream telling exactly the location and the individuals who are attending the meeting. You don't do that. That's lack of discipline. But it goes beyond that. Once somebody commits such an act, what do you do about that? No revolution has ever succeeded. On the foundation of indiscipline. So we have made a lot of progress, but I think we still have a long way to go. And until discipline becomes one of the pillars that hold our revolution, we will continue to face difficulties. And that is where civic education, political education comes in. When you talk about the Amazonia we want to build, how do you want to see it? When you talk about the economic prospects that we put, it's also about our people. It's the human resources that we are offering to the world. And like I've said several times before, we've got a country neighbor that has got over or close to 200 million people. That's a big market. Yeah. But we need to sell ourselves to that neighbor, for the neighbor to think, oh, these people, they could be a good market for us. The same with our neighbors on the east, when eventually they become our neighbors. We're not just talking about the 18 or so million people, but we are talking about the whole of the Central African region. We will be able to service this region. But you can only do that with the masses who are well-informed, well-educated, but well-disciplined. And that has to start now. It cannot start after we've gone to Boya, then we start to say, okay, can we now? It starts now. If it doesn't start now, for sure, back to your question, we may end up like South Sudan.
Well, all right, Millan, talking about political education, let's move now to educating our masses, because you just explained how we need to sell ourselves to our neighbors. Yeah. And most often than not, we talk to people about our struggle, and yet we don't tell them what they want to hear. Yeah. We all understand that in as much as self-defense is a major role player in the restoration of our independence, we also know that geopolitics play a very massive role in this. How do we sell our story to our people? What pitch do we have in that? Because it's a game of interest, and we know that the world wants to see where they will benefit. Yeah. Now, when we go talking to people, what do we say? What do you advise people? Because myself, I find myself in situations where I need to explain why we want an independent Amazonia and why we think they can benefit from the independence of Ambazonia. So what advice do you have for our people? What pitch do they have to give out there so that we attract people to support us in restoring our independence completely?
I think this goes back to political education, and here you're not just talking about the masses, you're talking about everybody. I have been part of meetings where these questions have been asked, questions such as, what do you want? Why should we support you in what you want? And answers such as, no, we in 1961, our people, yes, we know the history. Yes, we understand the history. Very often, before people even sit to talk with you, they've taken the time to do their homework and understand the history. Very often, like you say, what is the need for us? We need to be able to understand the language of these kinds of negotiations, of diplomacy, and how to pitch our story. And once again, this is where we need to start interrogating our capacity to go out there and sell our story. But there are certain fundamentals that we haven't put in place. And these are some of the things that at the moment I'm more and more interested in terms of how do I contribute to the revolution. I cannot remember an instance where we have had a conversation as to what kind of country do we want to put in place. And when you say, but we don't have a political, what do you call it? Philosophy. We don't have a political philosophy. If you go to the Scandinavia, a lot of the Scandinavian countries subscribe to
social model.
Yes, to a socialist model, but also they've got something which they call the law of Jante, many of them, which basically is, and that's why in a Scandinavian country you would hardly find anybody who's super wealthy and they flaunt it and they go out there and show everybody how much I've got more than you've got, because there is a belief and an understanding that you have no right to have so much while I have so little. And so they build an economy, just like the politics that says as much as possible they want an egalitarian society. We haven't had that kind of conversation. Some may say we want to build a socialist country, others may say we want to have a purely capitalist country, a mixed economy. For me, these are the discussions we should be having. And when we go out there and talk to certain actors, we need to have that story right. The same goes, like I mentioned, for the kind of political education we give our people. We want to know exactly what kind of country we want to build. If we talk about the Singapore of Africa or the Dubai, but what does that mean? How do you get to that point? What do you put in place to ensure that there is good governance? Everybody, including Mr. Paul Biya, says, oh, I'm putting in place the New Deal, but what do you do to ensure that your New Deal is not just on paper, but is something that is in fact? We need to be able to build that, and I think that is something that a conversation that we haven't had enough. Here and there, every now and then, when we sit over a drink, we have that conversation, but there has been no deliberate discussion as a movement, as a new government, as a country, and as a government in exile to say, this is what we are going to do. But then again, it's a learning curve. We are learning as we're going. We're making our mistakes, and we're moving forward.
Sloganeering has become a thing in Africa, where every new politician, before they take power, they would say change, scam. I mean, you will see a lot of that in La République du Cameroon now when the likes of Ben Muna and whoever are the candidates. They would say we are bringing change, we are bringing change. And we have seen that across Africa. We have seen that in Nigeria over the years. We have seen that in Kenya. We've seen that in Ghana. There's the preaching of change. But whenever we get to the new incumbent comes into power, what happens usually is that change is all that we see. Change of office, change of personnel. And that change never translates to action. It never translates to policy that actually people do things that represent that change. You know, they never go past that sloganeering of change. And every now and then, like every now and then, after one term, two term, people start crying, we want change again, we want change. So I really think that we need to start that political education now, not yesterday. I think it will benefit me more if I'm contributing my $20 to support the interim government. And in exchange, I'm getting that political education to become a citizen. I mean, it's civic, something they taught us in passive. But this is the most important aspect of the Western world, their civics, their ideology as a people. It's taught for for that's the longest subject that is taught. And Americans, when you want to become an American, when you sit for a whole interview for you to understand what being an American is, that is exactly what I think we need at this moment. We need to get to a place where we refine and define what is an Ambazonian, what are the cultures of Ambazonia to be. So that's what we will pride ourselves in. It's not just we say no, we want change because we are running away from a 35 years old regime. We are running away from 56 years of oppression. We need to be able to define what that change is and start changing ourselves now as people, the way we behave around the world. That is really going to help. So if we were meeting stakeholders now and they asked, for instance, how can you prove to me that Southern Cameroon will not become a failed state like South Sudan? And you need to pitch. What would you say? Because a lot of our people get asked this question every now and then. We were in a meeting with Raymond last week, and a lot of that came up. You know, like people are getting cold because of the failure of South Sudan. Stakeholders are getting cold. So how do we put an argument against we are not going to become South Sudan right now?
Well, I think I've just explained previously a bit of why I think that we shouldn't be afraid of becoming South Sudan, but at the same time, those things that we must not tolerate at this point, because if we do, there is a very strong risk that we may end up being that. You also mentioned sloganeering and the fact that you have change of leadership comes with a whole lot of change. One of the reasons why the South African, especially the ANC model, which very often you might find in countries like China and so on, is appealing, is because the agenda, the mandate and the agenda does not belong to an individual. It belongs to a movement. It belongs to a movement that decides what it wants, and the individual is merely the representative of the ideal that has been crafted by the whole. If you look back to the very beginning of SCACUF and how we had set it up, we had spoken about the importance of having what was called then the Leadership Council, which then became the Leadership Council, became the Governing Council and the Restoration Council and so on. That it's always important to have some kind of a body of wise men and women, of educated men and women, men with a certain level of rectitude, whose job it is to invite, to advise and direct the executive. Now, there were certain dispositions we had put in place at the time, which said, for instance, if you really want somebody to invest their time and their energy and their everything into this struggle, we need to get people who can do it full time. And for you to do that, you need to put them on a stipend, so that you don't call them in the morning and they say, oh, you know, I cannot do it because, oh, I had to go to the market to sell because my daughter needs to go to school. But we put them on a stipend which is respectable enough for them to look after their families. And we had put the individuals who are going to benefit from this, and we expected them to give in their 100%. But certain individuals would wake up one morning and say, no, we don't have to do that, we're in a revolution. But the reason why the revolution had failed for 30 years is because there were no dedicated individuals. It becomes important, therefore, that our people get schooled in these things to say, we're talking about civics. You talk about very simple things. If you talk about the Americans and the American flag, it's something that they are proud of, and that's why in front of every other house, you have people have their flags because they are proud. They sing their anthem and they put on their anthem, and it's something that they are proud of, and everybody is proud to sing the national anthem and be part of it. We come from a culture that has disenfranchised us and beaten our brains so adult to the point where even things which are favorable to us, we are against. So you come on a program like this and the national anthem is played, and then there is a whole outcry to say, oh, who gave you the right to play the national anthem? But why do you have a national anthem? Why do you have an anthem? It is that thing that gives you the sense of patriotism. So back to civics. In South Africa, you have, for instance, what we call the national tree, which everybody knows. So the national animal that is symbolic of South Africa. Up until now, we are still battling as to whether we're going to go for the eagle or the dove, and we haven't had a conversation around that. So it is important also that in as much as we acknowledge that we have made a lot of progress. There is a lot that we haven't done. And largely we haven't done this because every time you come with ideas, which in my opinion are progressive ideas that can take us forward. Because sometimes just the bird, just the symbol, the national symbol, be it a dove or an eagle, is what gives pride to the person in the deep village who has got nothing else. But when you have individuals who say, no, 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 you can't do that because, oh, that only belongs to the president, then you're in trouble. And so we are lucky that today we've got a leadership and a leader who's very open-minded and who has very, very much disengaged himself from this kind of thinking, this kind of archaic La Republic thinking that says this is how you must do and everything must be built around one individual. So, and it goes back to what you were saying. I think every movement, a movement like ours, needs to be built around a philosophy, a national philosophy to which everybody subscribes, or at least the vast majority subscribe, and to which the person who represents us, be that person a president, a prime minister, or in our case now we've got a president of an interim government, his job is not to craft policies and decide this is how I want us to go. His job is to roll out policies that we have all agreed on. That way, and that's why I keep saying, I like the Chinese model, I like the South African model, and very much even the American model, because when you're a Democrat or a Republican, you are there as a Democrat, but you're also representing the interests of a particular group of people. These are the conversations we don't have. The background and the culture from which we come is where you have one leader who runs the country by decree. So he wakes up in the morning, he had a bad dream last night, he decides that I'm going to give you the sack, he sacks you. And that is law. So that has to change. And for that to change, we need to start having that conversation now and start changing the mindset of our people and start building our own philosophy. This would help us, back to your question, to sell our country better when we talk to prospective clients of the country that we want to put in place. They will understand that we are not just a group of people who say, oh, we want our independence, we want our country, but they're saying, we want our country because we want to make the difference. And the difference we're going to make is that this is how the country is going to look. It's going to look like this because we've put this in place to ensure that by the time we get there, we are ready. That's the kind of conversation we should be having that we are not having. And it's painful sometimes when you see a whole lot of our compatriots spend a lot more time blackmailing, sabotaging, insulting each other, whereas we could be contributing to a whole lot more towards this ideal that we want to create.
Thank you.